All right, James chapter 5. We are moving into the last chapter. Do not get any kind of misunderstanding about being close to being done just because it's the last chapter. I think you know better than to think that. We're going to be looking at the first 6 verses. We're going to begin that today. We will not finish that today, but we will begin the first 6 verses of chapter 5 if my official reader is ready to do 6 verses for me.
Okay.
Hit it, Kevin.
Chapter 5, 1 through 6.
Yes, sir.
Come now, you rich, cry, howl over your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their corrosion will be a witness against you, and will consume your flesh like fire. You have stored up such treasure in the last days. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, that which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcries of those who did the harvesting have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and lived in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous man. He does not resist you.
Now, after that dramatic reading, we'll get back into things here. We have, if you've not been paying attention, another test for living faith. That is the entirety of the book of James. This is one of the simplest books in the Bible to understand. It is a unique place in the Bible. As I told when we started the study, it's the very first New Testament book to be written. Before God inspired anyone else to say anything, He inspired James to address the issue of how to know if you do indeed have saving faith. Despite that, the simplicity of this book and the critical importance of it, as I told you as well, this is a book that has been controversial. A number of early reformers looked at this and wondered, why in the world did we put that into the canon of Scripture at all? It has this strange, uneven feel to it. It just seems to jump all over the place. It seems to lack structure. It seems to lack any kind of in-depth theological tenet to it. Why is it even in there? If you remember, Luther called it a right strawy book, a book made out of straw. There was just nothing there for it. And yet, at the same time, this book is also a source of incredible controversy on some of the deepest theological divides the church has. Now, how can it have no context in terms of theology, at the same time be the heart of church division? Because people come to this and they find in this book that is devoted to one purpose, test of character, to find living faith. And they find doctrinal divide over this. One of the deepest ones that we dealt with a while back, if you recall, one of the dividing doctrines is how is salvation obtained? And there are large denominations around this world that will tell you it has to be a combination of 2 things. Grace and works. So you have faith and grace and works. And those 2 somehow, you have this combination. God cuts a deal with you, and you and I, we're going to get together here, Dustin. I'm going to do my part. You do. We're going to get salvation one way. Between the 2 of us, we can do this. That's the supposed God cuts this deal. And yet, that has nothing, as we told you, context is king, remember? Context is king. What is the context of this book? And this book has nothing to do with teaching the means of salvation. What's the nature of this book? Evidence of the existence of salvation. And so this book does not teach the idea that works are necessary to gain. James chapter 5, verses 1 to 6. No, we're not. I don't know what happened to the recording, but there we go. Let's see if it goes on. It should be gone. And I had a brilliant thought there that is completely gone, but we'll keep on.
You said God wouldn't forget.
God does not forget. But anyway, and I did. Understand this aspect. Power, money, is a corrupting influence if you're a corrupt person. I don't know if you've ever watched all of these superhero movies that have been out that were so big, you know, Iron Man and Captain America. I always had this question. Do you really think in our world that if you gave those kind of superpowers to a bunch of humans that they would become superheroes? Do you think most of them would become, vigilant defenders of the good? I don't think so. I think if you removed accountability, if you put them above the powers that could hold them accountable, very few of them would do what is right. That's just not in there. I go to Uncle Ben theology from Spider-Man. Uncle Ben's dying on the sidewalk, and what he says, with great power comes great responsibility. Probably the only good thing that came out of those movies. But anyway.
I'll just make it.
Never mind, okay. Now I'm losing it again. So again, money is not the problem. As I said, context is the issue. Context is the issue. So let's be very careful about the context here. And this, again, going back to those that want to make this into a social issue. It's a personal issue because the entire book is written to be a personal evaluation of your faith. You cannot read this passage to be something else because the entire book is in one context only. What is my handling of things? What is it that I'm here? This is not some book where this is always what gets me. James, really? He's preaching Marxism? Really? of faith based on disproving God, thinking there is no God, yet somehow James is saying, here's my thing. Lennon is a better guy than you thought. I'm sorry, this is not what's going on. This is a change in who you are. And if you see this test runs right through Scripture. If you really will, the whole parable on the soils is really Jesus talking about some of these same tests. If you look at though, he talks about the seed that falls on stony ground. And stony ground, he says, there's just enough soil for the plant to take initial root and come up, but then it tries to push down, it dies, and it says the sun comes up and it burns it out. And what is he liken the sun to? The trials of life. They failed the test of trials. They were not up to, when life hit them with the reality of life, they found their faith wasn't real. But then you find the one that went into the soil with the weeds, or the thorns, depending on your translation. And those plants came up, and then the weeds came up with them, and what happened? It choked them out. And he gave an example of what happened there. And he said, the deceit of riches. They failed the test of how you handle money. They were deceived. They were misled. They were misunderstood. Character is what is in view here. Character is what goes on. This is what Matthew wrote down, what Jesus said, verse 3:22. This is the one who hears the word, and the worry of the world and the deceitfulness of riches chokes the word, and it becomes unfruitful. They fail the test as well. These are not something James just came up with. He's taking them right out of the words of Jesus, and he's putting them down as basic tests of living faith. Jesus used this test, if you recall, Matthew 19. Remember, the rich young ruler came to him and said, what must I do to follow you? And Jesus said, sell all that you have and give it to the poor, and I'll be waiting right here to take off. We'll go together. And the young man did what? Because he was very wealthy. Now, I have actually heard people, and some denominations use that passage to teach that a Christian should be poor. Because Jesus won't take a follower that hasn't given up everything. The vow of chastity and poverty that is in the Catholic Church, the vow of poverty is based on that passage. Now, I've met a number of priests, and they may not personally own anything, but I have not noted living in poverty. That doesn't seem to be a reality. Jesus wasn't giving a standard for salvation there. He recognized the character of this young man, and in order to reveal the flawed character, the unreality of his faith, he put a test in front of him that immediately exposed it to everyone. As I told you when they had the whole thing about laying out the fleece, testing God, that is not a Bible standard for how you get God's decisions in your life. That is a story of a man trying to avoid what God wanted him to do. This is not for everyone. It is a test to find out if some people are corrupt, and money shows it. This is what we need to find here. You even find it when you look at leadership. One of the standards, if we've been listening to our pastors and going through these things, he went through this thing for elders, and there's a passage in there that you would remember. It says that an elder must be free from money. Quiet? You all agree with that?
Love of money.
He needs to be free of the love of money.
Sordid gain.
sort of, he cannot be someone who's in love with money. Doesn't see, can't have any. Again, he cannot be a person who loves it. It cannot dictate his life. And to find that out, he says, how do you know if he's in love with money? Look at how he manages his household. Now that has two things. There are people and there are finances in managing a household. How does he treat people and how does he handle money? And we look for character. Now all of that is introduction to get to the passage. And in verse 1, this whole thing starts out, and it starts out with a phrase we've heard just a little while ago, come on. Or come you. Or my favorite is just, oh, come on. It was used back in the passage we did just shortly ago in chapter 4. It's that same thing. It's a mocking phrase that James opened up with, which basically says, if you stop, you know better than this. What I'm going to say shouldn't come as a shock to you. This shouldn't be surprising. What I'm going to cover here, if you have a brain in your head, you will have noticed this is true. And that's what he's now going to expose here and go after. Oh, come on. Now, he's going to talk to the rich. I need to establish something with you, very important here. The passage talks about a guy with grains and also, but I want you to understand, the definition of rich in the time that James writes is a little different than ours. They had their uber rich, but they did not have anything like we have. The disparity, most people, overwhelmingly, people did not have that kind of wealth. There was a certain, the number of billionaires we have, it would dwarf what was seen that day. It's just an amazing difference. Looking at us, what we call middle class, any of us will look up, you know, am I rich? No, we're middle class. We're middle. Looking at what we live in middle class, they would have thought we were the most opulent people who ever existed. Here's what the definition of wealth was in a world that did not have safety nets and then welfare to a degree. It didn't have these things. If you had more than you needed to survive, you had passed into the world of being wealthy. Now, yes, they had the uber rich too. They had the ones that had all sorts of things, and James addresses that. But the dividing line between wealth and poverty was having more than you need. Here's where character enters the picture. When your decisions are not about, am I going to have enough food to live through the day? Am I going to be able to feed my family? Am I going to be able to get enough to keep the farm going? If you had more than that, now character kicks in because you have something that you can decide what you're going to do with it any way you want. Because it's not tied to survival. It's not tied to any bills. It's not tied to any responsibility. It is now your personal choice what you're going to do with it. And James is addressing that moment. When you have more than you need, how do you handle it? What do you do with it that tells you something about character? And this is the test as it stands. And that test is the same for anyone whether they have a ton more than they need or even just a little bit. It's a test of how you handle the things that are more than you need. And he makes this comment. Come now. Oh, come on, Rich. You need to be weeping and howling for the miseries that are coming upon you. He's saying, you're rich, and most of the time when you're rich, you're thinking, isn't this great? And he's saying, you're rich, but you shouldn't be thinking this is great. You should be weeping and howling. And I love that word for howling. It was used in chapter 4 to talk about what you should be doing as you look at your sin, and the same idea comes in here. Has anyone here ever been to a funeral from people in the Middle East or Far East at times? You ever have? I got to go to several over the course of time. We go to a funeral, we all sit down, the person talks about the person's life, family members will come up and share, and we'll sing a hymn, we'll have some meditation time. It's very somber, it's very quiet. In those, they are shrieking. The women most especially will shriek and howl their pain. That's how they express their pain at a funeral. It's not solemn, it's not quiet. It is loud. It is in your face. And if you've never been to one, it is really, if your culture is not that, it is shocking. You kind of go, what is going on? First one I was at, I'm just kind of not sure how to respond to this. That's what he's saying here. You should be shrieking as if you were at a funeral, and guess whose funeral it is? It's yours. This is your funeral. You are not prepared for what is about to come, and you should be weeping and howling. You'll find that same word up in James 4:9, describing the response to how we should have when we see ourselves under judgment of God, and that's what he's bringing here. Why should a rich person be in that level of pain and concern? Because Jesus said this. This is again Luke 6:24. Woe to you that are rich. You're going, because he hates rich people, right? No. He's a particular group of rich people. For you have received your consolation. Here's what he's saying. If you're one of the corrupt rich, if you're the one that's put all of your hope in riches, you've got a bad moment. Because you've received all the good you're ever going to get. Every good thing that will ever be in your life through eternity has already happened. And it's temporary. You've gotten as good as it's going to get for you because you've ignored the spiritual permanent things. And now, woe to you who are rich, who are full, for you will hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. When you've put everything into this life, when you've put everything here and said this is as good as it's going to be, God is saying this should be the baddest day of your life to recognize everything you have is temporary. It's all going to pass, and the next stage is going to be worse than anything you imagined. If riches is all you now, why is he against the rich here? Why is it? What is the issue? What's the sin here? I want you to take note of this. Come now. Oh, come on, you rich. You should be weeping and howling for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and you gave as much, you've eaten your gold and silver, which you have corroded, for the core erosion is evidence against what you've done. You have, as talk about, you have laid up for yourselves here. You have laid up for treasure in the last days. You have laid it up. And you have a different translation there for having laid up?
Heaped up.
Heaped up. That's actually better. Anybody have another one?
Stored up.
Stored. It's all stored? Heaped up is a better understanding. It really is better. Another way you could put laid up just for yourselves is the way to put it. Now, he's going for that direct. You ever seen the movie or a cartoon where they have that over-the-top rich character that has this pile just going mine, and they're just pulling the coins up and dropping through their fingers. And look at all of it. And then I remember old Scrooge McDuck from the Disney cartoon had he would go in and jump in his vault and swim through the gold coins. That's what they're talking about. I've taken this, and the only reason I have it is so that I can look at it and know I have it. Yeah.
Is it a worship issue?
It is a worship issue. That's again, I put it there so I can look at it. This is my God. It's there, and I pile it up for myself so that I know I have that pile. It's just there. And I like knowing it's there. And I never want it to go away. And he's saying that this is the problem. You've laid all this stuff just for yourselves. Just to have it. And he's now going to say, here's how that's stupid. I want you to understand how silly that is. Now, he's going to use examples that are a little odd to us. Because it's in a time where wealth was measured in different things. This was an agrarian society. There wasn't a lot of coin. There wasn't a lot of banks. They didn't have stocks and bonds. They didn't have those kind of things. So where was your wealth? It was in your land. It was in the crop. So here's what he's saying. Now, I want you to follow logic here. You have a farmer, or you have a cattle rancher, or you have someone, a shepherd, and you have gone out and your fields have yielded just beyond measure. It is just, the warehouses are overflowing with the stuff. All of this stuff is piled up. You've slaughtered the cattle, you've jerked the beef, you've got it all ready. Here's your wealth. It is, fruits and vegetables and grain and beef hanging in the smokehouse. And what's the problem with that kind of wealth?
Goes bad.
It keeps for a little while.
Yeah, temporal.
It's not going to keep. It's insane for a farmer to take all the grain and just stick it in a silo and never do anything with it. And just go back and look at all the grain. it's going to rot. It's not going to hold up. The beef is going to rot. I don't care how much you salt it or how much you smoke it, it's going to rot. It's all going to go bad. So he's saying, you don't seem to understand that your wealth is that. The other one he mentions is garments. He said your garments are moth-eaten. I had that reality brought to me. I had a suit that I used. I was asked to do a wedding. I flew to Missouri to do a wedding, and I had my wool suit with me, and it was actually a custom made. I had a thing made, actually fit me in like anything I'd ever had before. I loved that suit because I knew I'd never afford another one, and I had that suit. And it had never had a problem here in the Yellow Valley. But I hung it in the hotel room, and then I did the sermon, and I came home, and a week later I took that suit out, riddled with holes. Just riddled. All it took was one night in a hotel in Missouri, hanging that coat up to have every moth in the country go, dinner time. In the day in which he writes, these are primarily as shepherding people. They didn't grow that much cotton in that region. They did some, but most clothing was made out of wool. And one of the tests of wealth was having multiple sets of clothes. You might remember this from Samson. He had made a bet, and one of the bets that was cashing in, I think it was 10 changes of clothes. I might have the number wrong. Having more outfits than you needed. I remember the cowboy thing. They go, how about your clothes? One off, one on, and one in the laundry. That's all I've got. And if you had 10, 12 sets of clothes, this was wealth. And again, he's saying, you hang that up in the closet, how long is it going to keep? How long is it going to hold on? How's that going to work out for you? That one's not going to work either. This is not wealth you can hold on to. He has a different aspect of wealth. And then he has another example here, and he says you take your gold and your silver, and it corrodes. Now that one seems a little strange. Our critics have hit this one. I actually brought something with me. I'm trying to bring this home. I'm now off camera. Hopefully I'm talking loud enough that the recording will continue to go on, but you won't wonder what I'm talking about over here. But coins have an interesting thing to them. It's already been stolen. That's what happens when you have things like that. But wealth is interesting because they say, well, gold and silver don't corrode. Silver tarnishes, but gold and silver doesn't corrode. This is a U.S. Mint gold coin, 1 ounce. 1 ounce of gold. I can take this thing and I can bury it in the backyard and I can dig it up 20 years later and it'll look pretty much like it looks right now. Because if you look in the back of this thing, it says 0.999% pure gold. 0.999. You know what? Their gold wasn't quite so pure. They didn't have a U.S. Mint that set a standard that made this coin had to meet these exacting things. Their smelting process was not, and also there was a dishonesty. I tended to put more other metals in a gold coin and then pass it as a gold coin because I wanted my gold to stretch longer. And so here's a reality that we often don't think of. If they buried their gold coin, they put that in the backyard, it wouldn't corrode. They'd come back and there'd be a pile of dust there. And they'd have to go and sift the gold back out of it, what was left of it, because it would fall apart. So he's saying, even though you think you've got gold and silver, that's not going to last either. Because it's not pure. It is not a pure thing we're talking about here. You have a problem. Why does God give us more than we need? Why do we have?
It's grace.
It's a grace aspect. God is just showing His grace. What else is He doing?
To share it.
He's giving us a means of ministry. God gives you more than you need to see what you're going to do with it beyond just for yourself. Does that mean that God hates bank accounts that draw interest? God hates you having a retirement saving? God doesn't want you to have any investments? That's just evil? No. There is wisdom in planning. There's wisdom in planning for retirement. There's wisdom in seeing to it that your children are not going to have to support you because you're living on the street later. There's some things, and you guys better remember that. They did take you in and do things with you all these years. But here we are. He's saying here, you have to have a choice about what you're going to do. Do you look beyond yourselves? And God, for most of us, gives us more than we need to see what character we're going to go.
What's your focus?
What is your focus in life?
And
What matters to you most?
it's not God that's, well, gee, let's see what he did. God knows.
God knows.
It's for us.
Absolutely. The reality is going to show in your character. And it's going to be the people around your children, the in-laws they have now, the grandchildren. They're going to look at you. They're going to know what person you are based largely upon how you handle things. The character you showed in managing the things that were put into your hands. People and wealth. I always got myself in trouble. I was asked to preach at the Southern Baptist Church once, and I was talking on finances, and I made this comment that got me into a world of trouble. I said, you know, tithing is not taught any place in the New Testament. I didn't realize this is one of the principal tenets in the Southern Baptist Church. Tithing is, and the room, you crickets, man. Absolute crickets. But I want to put this out to you. When we look at this, the 10% in the Old Testament that we talk about, we all talk about tithing, largely went to support the government of the Old Testament. It was largely done to make sure that you could have the armies and build the cities and do the roads and do the things, because they lived under a theocracy. God established a government for Israel. The real test of character was not in whether they paid the tithe. That was the law. The character came from the free will offerings that people put out there out of their excess and said, I dedicate this to God and I don't have to. That's where character was seen. Not just paying the tax that was required, but what did you give to help others that was beyond that, that was up to you and entirely up to you.
That's why Ananias and Sapphira was just like, psst.
Ananias and Sapphira, they felt not because they didn't give a certain percentage, not because but because they said they gave a certain amount that was not true. They lied for prestige. In fact, the apostle said, you could have kept it all. There was no requirement that you give 10%. There was no requirement you give any amount. That was entirely up to you. And you had to pretend to give it all and lie about it. The test of character always comes down to what we do with what is more than we need. How do you handle that? Look at how the early church did it. They took money up for some number of different things. Paul took a collection from the entirety of the Gentile churches for the poor in Jerusalem. So they did it to help people who had less than they had. They took up collections to see to it that the gospel could spread. We want to support the ministry and we want to send people out because investing in eternal lives is more important than anything else I can do. They invested in all sorts of medicine. They invested in helping people. It was always moving out beyond them. And there was no requirement of the amount. It always came down to the quality of the decision you were going to make. And quite frankly, I've even had some Christians who foolishly gave more than they should and failed in their responsibility to take care of their family, which gets condemned in Scripture. If you don't take care of your own household, you're worse than an unbeliever. God's pretty ticked off about that. Don't tell me how spiritual you were by giving the money and your family is starving. That's not good management. It comes down to how we handle these things. What do we do with the more that we have than we need? Setting aside just so you can look at how much you have is the sin here. Not having it. God is not upset that they made money. We're going to go down through this as we get further on, and it's going to talk about a number of things. I also want you to understand this as we get through this business. It's going to talk, there's a business here, there's employees, how they treat the employees, are they fair about that? All of that comes down to this, and it's not a condemnation of wealth at any given point. It's a condemnation of the decisions you make and how you use it. How do you plan to use money wisely? How do you manage wealth in a way that shows it isn't just about you? That is the question on hand here. You can hit the button here.